Hi, thanks everybody. I'm just mixing it up and using the podium because if I hold a microphone, I end up waving my hands about and the microphone moves with them. So this is easier for me because it allows me to move my hands about. So thanks so much, Protocol Labs, for having me here. I'm so delighted, first of all, to be meeting so many of you here. Second of all, to be able to talk about what we've been doing at Zumo on decarbonising crypto. I've just realised I don't have a clicker. Is the clicker here? Because I need to move the slides on. Thanks. Sorry, so while I'm waiting for the slides to go on, I'll just proceed. But I work for Zumo. We're a blockchain technology company. We're UK-based. We're compliance-led, so we're regulated by the... Sorry, we're not regulated. We're registered with the Financial Conduct Authority. And we have both a consumer app, so a cryptocurrency app, and we also have an enterprise side of the business as well. So we work with financial institutions, fintechs, to allow them to provide crypto as a service. Thank you so much. I think I'm having the same issue that others were having with the clicker. Sorry, I am. 1 minute. Okay, so we are very focused currently on Bitcoin. We understand the public perception issues with Bitcoin. We also understand that we do have a real energy consumption issue with Bitcoin. And I wholeheartedly agree with all the comments from the panel earlier and from Brad as well. I think a lot of what I would normally cover here has already been said, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I will add one thing, which is I think we need to really acknowledge that as a sector, we have come to prominence at exactly the time that the Paris Agreement has taken effect, and we need to move rapidly to net zero. Now, what is scary in the public eye is a sector which has a very visible carbon footprint, very easy to measure electricity consumption, and in the case of Bitcoin, increasing year on year, or it has at least been doing that until now. And I think we really do have a public perception issue as well as the actual electricity consumption that we need to be dealing with as a sector in terms of our own impact. So we've been really focused on this at Zumo, and that's what I want to talk about today. So there's three aspects to what I want to talk about today. First of all, I want to lift the conversation up above crypto, so to take the focus away from crypto for a minute and just look at what we mean by carbon footprints and Scope 3 emissions. I'll then talk about Zumo's own journey, and then I'll talk about some of the practical solutions that we've started to develop as we're on this journey. So in terms of bringing it up a level, normally I would do a little bit of an introduction to Scope 1, 2 and 3 and what that means. I think we've got a fairly carbon literate audience here, and Alan also covered that to some extent in his keynote presentation at the beginning. So I'm not intending to do that. But what I want to do here is give two examples of completely non-crypto, non-blockchain companies and their carbon footprint, and all will become clear in a minute as to why I'm doing this. So first off, Unilever, they're a global consumer goods company. If you don't know Unilever, you will know their brands. They have a lot of cosmetics and hygiene brands like Dove. They've got a lot of ice cream brands like Ben & Jerry's. They've got Hellmann's mayonnaise, all these kind of things. And Unilever are a real leader in this field. They've done very comprehensive work on their own carbon footprint, which is part of the reason that I want to share this. And the point of this slide is to show the complexity when a company really starts digging into not only its own carbon footprint, its Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which in the case of Unilever here is only 2% of its carbon footprint. When you really start to dig into a company's carbon footprint, the vast majority for almost every company is going to be their Scope 3 emissions. And in the case of Unilever here, I mean, you can read through it yourself. I'm not going to go through them all, but it will highlight some really unexpected things. In the case of Unilever, 10% of their emissions comes from freezers in retailers storing their ice cream. So a lot of their work on their net zero strategy now is on the use of refrigerants, how they make freezers more efficient so that they can reduce their emissions in that way. So the complexity of it is massive in terms of this multifaceted approach that's needed to address their carbon footprint. And here's another example that you'll be familiar with too. Starbucks, they've got 30,000 coffee shops globally, yet only 8% of their carbon footprint comes from the operation of those coffee shops. 11% comes through the growing of the coffee that they use, and a whopping 21% comes through the milk that they put in their coffee. Now, neither of them have got anything to do with crypto, but the reason I'm showing you is this is Zumo's Scope 1, 2 and 3 carbon footprint. Now, this is indicative at the moment for reasons that I'm going to explain, but the complexity of the two I've just shown you is really, really apparent. And what really strikes me when I look at our own carbon footprint here is the relative simplicity of it, in that our carbon footprint, and bear in mind, we are basically an intermediary in the crypto ecosystem. We're not a mining company. So we are an intermediary, and we want to take account of the cryptocurrency footprint that we believe that we're responsible for. And that basically is electricity consumption. So we at Zumo have conducted a really comprehensive study of our own carbon footprint, and about 95% of that is due to electricity. And that makes our job much easier than for most other sectors that have this really, really complex value chain that need to do a lot of engagement with suppliers, etc. Now, I do want to caveat this before I move on, because it is indicative. At Zumo, we much prefer to calculate the electricity consumption of the cryptocurrencies that we work with and our responsibility for that electricity consumption. I'm quite hesitant to then convert that into a carbon footprint because there are huge uncertainties in doing so. For all the reasons that just have been discussed, Bitcoin mining tends to make use of stranded renewables. There tends to be a higher proportion of renewables than a grid average figure for a country would show you. So it's indicative, but I have used country grid averages to come up with this figure for where Bitcoin and Ethereum mining happens. So that's the kind of broad context in terms of our own carbon footprint and how we might go on to address that. But there are some other considerations I just want to briefly highlight. And my background is not in crypto, so I develop net zero strategies in other sectors, and I think I can bring to this an element of insight from other sectors as well. Crypto absolutely fascinates me. The amount of environmental and social good that we have the potential to do is absolutely massive. But there are some things that we need to consider in developing net zero strategies that are very different to other sectors. Firstly, with Bitcoin, our supply chain is fixed. The nature of the Bitcoin protocol is that it is entirely fungible. We can't point to certain miners, not at the moment anyway. We need to work with all Bitcoin in circulation. So with any other sector, you would choose your supply chain. You would work closely with your supply chain to reduce your Scope 3 emissions. And in the case of Bitcoin, we've got quite a different system happening here. Also with Bitcoin, electricity consumption cannot be controlled by individual players. Now, clearly it can within the mining community, but by individual players, I mean people like the holders of the crypto or by Zumo. We need to deal with the electricity consumption of the Bitcoin network at any point in time, and we all know that that can be heavily influenced by the value of Bitcoin. So we need to be responsive to that, and we do what we can through our own net zero strategy to influence it, and I'll come on and talk about that. But we cannot directly control the electricity consumption that we believe we're responsible for as part of our own Scope 3 emissions. But there are a lot of positives as well. We've got a simple ecosystem and we've got good data. Now, I know there's a lot of uncertainties around the data. I know there's a lot of uncertainties when you start converting electricity consumption into carbon. But we've got good data compared to most other sectors, especially when you start to look at other sectors' Scope 3 emissions. And as you've just seen from Zumo's own carbon footprint, our Scope 3 emissions are 90% or thereabouts electricity consumption. And that gives us a real area of focus. And as has already been said by others, it gives us an opportunity as a sector, if done well, and if we collaborate, and if we all do it with impact, it gives us an opportunity to really scale the use of renewables globally. And that's something that we're really excited about at Zumo, and it's something that we've started doing quite a lot of work on as to how might we begin to do this. So with that, I'll take you through our own journey briefly. So we launched in 2020. The year before that, we established a charity partnership with WasteAid, which is a small and growing charity that are a really, really similar growth journey to Zumo, and they work with people in the world's poorest communities to implement good waste management practices. They basically help all the people that blockchains and cryptocurrencies have got the greatest potential to help. So there's so many synergies there. We started our decarbonisation journey the year after that. We did a lot of work trying to quantify our own carbon footprint, and then, thank goodness for us, the Crypto Climate Accord was formed in April 2021. Since then, we've been working really closely, not only with the Accord, but with all the brilliant contacts that we have made through the Crypto Climate Accord. So thank you so much to everybody who was involved in doing that. We launched our own net zero strategy along with our State of Play report round about the time of COP in 2021, and then immediately after that we started our own Zero Hero project, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, but that really was our first practical step of our net zero strategy to say how do we begin to decarbonise Bitcoin as an intermediary in the crypto ecosystem. We found out in March that we'd been awarded Innovate UK, that's UK government funding, to continue our decarbonisation journey, and we're really excited to be partnering with Zero Labs in delivering that. So there's loads of good work going on with them at the moment, and we will have updates at some point in the future, but at the moment we're hard at work on everything that we're doing. And we published a white paper to make available firstly, everything we'd done through the Zero Hero pilot, and secondly, the methodologies that we had developed ourselves. In the interest of transparency, we wanted that all out in the public domain, so we issued a white paper in June, and that's freely available on Zumo's website. This is our net zero strategy. So we have 3 pillars to our net zero strategy. Pillar 1 is Zumo, the company. So that is our business travel, our office, our staff working from home, purchasing of laptops, computers, suppliers, all that kind of stuff. The chart I showed you earlier, that's only 5% or thereabouts of Zumo's own carbon footprint. So it's not significant, but it is in the sense that it involves all of our staff. And so it's really important to us that we take full account of that part of our carbon footprint, because it's the way that we get all our staff on board and make sure that they're fully involved in the net zero strategy too. Pillar 2 is the really interesting bit, so that's the cryptocurrencies and blockchains that we work with. So that's what we've been really focused on over the past year. How do we decarbonise our holdings? How do we decarbonise Bitcoin when individuals make a purchase on the Zumo app? And I will come on to talk more about that. But we can't work in a silo. No net zero strategy can exist in a silo. Any company can do amazing work on their own to move towards net zero, but they will never fully get there if they don't work with the wider ecosystem, because much of this involves collaboration, much of this involves things that will benefit a number of players at the same time and not just individual companies. So pillar 3 for us is how we engage and interact with the entire ecosystem. And we're really interested in being involved as much as we can in discussions. We're involved in a couple of working groups through Global Digital Finance, etc. So we're really excited to see how much movement there has been in the wider ecosystem over the past year or so. So the final bit of what I want to say, but perhaps the most interesting, is a bit of an overview of the research and practical work that we've been doing recently as to how we as Zumo can decarbonise and how others in the crypto sector can practically do that as well. And this is a screenshot of our white paper, which was published in June. It's available on our website, zumo.money. I'm literally giving you a snapshot here of what's in it. It's actually quite a comprehensive document. We talk a lot about the nuances of certain elements of our findings, and I probably don't have the time at the moment to go through what those nuances are. To me, they're the most interesting bit, so I would really encourage you, if this is of interest to you, to have a look at the white paper. Just to give you an overview, the Zero Hero pilot, which we ran in early 2022, the aim of that was, when Bitcoin was purchased by our customers in the Zumo app, the aim was to make a calculation as to what the electricity consumption of that Bitcoin was, and then make a purchase of renewable energy certificates equivalent to that at the end of the Zero Hero pilot, so that we effectively decarbonise the cryptocurrency Bitcoin that's purchased during the pilot period. That was intended to inform how we move forward with our own net zero strategy, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But basically, that covered £1.5 million worth of Bitcoin in the trial period. That, with the calculations that we used, was 850 megawatt hours of electricity. The methodologies are all available in the white paper. We used the average mine since Genesis model for that. And we did a survey which was hugely informative, and perhaps not that surprising. I think we realised that our customers were going to think that this was important. But actually 84% of our customers think that the issue of environmental sustainability in crypto is something the sector should be working urgently to address. So it really validates all the work that we have done on this to date and everything that we've got planned as well. We know that there's real demand for it. So some key takeaways then. I've got a couple of slides here on takeaways. One is on the methodologies themselves, and then one on renewable energy strategy. So on methodologies, it's probably worth saying that at the time that we started the Zero Hero project, there was nothing that I could find out there that was any kind of methodology published at all for determining how you might apportion electricity consumption for Bitcoin. So because that was the case, we actually developed a couple within Zumo, and because we developed them ourselves, we wanted to make sure that we were publishing them in the interest of transparency so that people could look back and see what we had done. So we had looked at something called the Mine Since Genesis model. So that, I think actually, Brad had kind of alluded to this in his talk before, that you can actually do an averaging of the electricity consumption of all Bitcoin since the first block was mined and kind of average that out. That's what we did through the Zero Hero project. What we're calling the Mined Now model is what I believe the Sustainable Bitcoin protocol is using at the moment. But there's another one called the network share model, which is basically just looking at the electricity consumption of the Bitcoin network over time and then apportioning that to an individual player within the system over that time. And we go into this in quite a lot of detail in the white paper, but there's pros and cons to each approach, and I do believe that we need a basket of methodologies under different circumstances, because, for example, when we're talking about individual users or holders of cryptocurrency, something that actually attributes the electricity consumption to that cryptocurrency is probably more appropriate, so the Mine Now or the Mine Since Genesis model. But if you're looking at an individual player within the cryptocurrency ecosystem, like Zumo, for example, then something like the network share model is actually more appropriate. And we go into some depth in that in the white paper to discuss why we now believe that we should be moving to that model as opposed to one that attributes it to the actual Bitcoin. The other thing to say is that literally when we were in the final stages of finalising the white paper, some fantastic guidance came out from South Pole and the Crypto Carbon Ratings Institute, I hope I've got that right, which we actually ended up incorporating into our own guidance so that you can see what all the methodologies are. And I've no idea if anybody here has been involved in doing that guidance, but I would love to discuss with you if that is the case. So that's kind of key takeaways on the methodologies. We focus really, really heavily on renewable energy strategy, because if you think back to that slide where I showed what Zumo's carbon footprint is, and 95% of that's due to electricity, if we are going to decarbonise by making purchases of RECs for that electricity, then we need to do it with the biggest possible impact. And we're having some really, really interesting discussions at the moment about how to do that. So we're certainly at the beginning of our journey with regards to this, but this is the bit that excites me most because I think there is so much potential. So we know from previous discussions and presentations earlier that there's market instruments that exist that allow us to procure renewable electricity. They're recognised by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, that the market is out there to allow us to do it. But I have to say that what was particularly interesting to me, and bearing in mind I'm a sustainability professional, I've been doing this for 20 years, navigating the RECs market was very interesting. And seeing what kind of issues there are in terms of having to go through intermediaries, having to buy in bulk, having to buy retrospectively. It's not an easy to access market, certainly not in the way that carbon offsets might be easier to access. But I think that gives us a huge opportunity as a sector. We're an electricity-intensive sector. It's been said in the various other panels and things today. We have this massive opportunity to really shake up that marketplace and really, really drive demand for renewables globally. And if we're going to do this with maximum impact, then we need to be clear what we're trying to achieve, because there is a big difference between balancing the books, you know, knowing that we're responsible for X megawatt hours of electricity and purchasing RECs to that effect, and then, you know, that's job done, and actually seeing where we can have impact when we do that. So although we have done the Zero Hero project, we have made a RECs purchase, it was really the beginning of this journey to see how do we continue with this and continue to have greater impact. And the way that we continue to have greater impact is by working with a wider sector to have bigger buying power, bigger voice, and collaborating on how best to do this. So I've just included in this slide here, firstly, the two Zumo publications that I spoke about, our State of Play report that we published at the end of last year, the white paper that we have just published. There's other ones, though, that you may or may not be aware of. The Crypto Climate Accord back in December produced guidance on methodologies for calculating electricity consumption and carbon emissions in relation to cryptocurrencies, which is fantastic. Theirs is more wide-ranging than ours because it looks both at the mining and the user side of things, whereas we're quite focused on intermediaries, exchanges, wallets, etc. The South Pole guidance that I just referred to is there too, and Global Digital Finance is doing a lot of work in this area. I think I mentioned they've got a couple of working groups, and they published some information before on the digital assets and ESG as well, which is really worth a read. So just to finish off with one of my favourite quotes, Nigel Topping, who was the UN Special Envoy for COP26, has famously said that in the race to net zero, we either all win or all lose. It's the one race that you don't want to run ahead in and try and get too far ahead of anybody else, because we all need to be racing at the same time. So with that in mind, we would love to talk to any of you, really. I've included my contact details here. I'm really interested to hear what others are doing. I'm really interested if you want to reach out and get in contact. I'm really interested if you want to talk about renewable energy strategy. So I think I'll finish off there. We've got a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has them, but thanks very much for your time.